Imagine this. You're sitting across from someone at a dinner party, and within 30 seconds, before they finish their second sentence, you know they're lying. Not because of what they said, but because of the microsecond their left eye twitched when they mentioned their job. The way their hand unconsciously moved to their throat when they said they were happy. The slight pitch change when they described their relationship. You didn't learn this from them. You learned it from the silence between their words, from the body they couldn't control while their mouth performed its carefully rehearsed script. Now, imagine that same power turned inward. Imagine realizing that every person you've ever met has been reading you the exact same way, decoding your fears, your insecurities, your desperate hunger for validation. And you never even knew the language existed. You've been screaming your deepest secrets in a dialect you didn't know you spoke, and everyone around you has been listening. The mask you thought was impenetrable, it's transparent. The persona you've cultivated for years, it's a children's disguise at an adult's masquerade. This is not theory. This is not pop psychology dressed in academic language. This is the terrifying reality that Sigmund Freud spent his life excavating from the depths of human consciousness, the revelation that we are all sleepwalkers, convinced we're awake, performing a play we don't remember auditioning for, reading from a script written by forces we cannot see. And here's the part that will haunt you long after you finish reading this. Everyone else can see the script. Everyone except you. Why does this matter? Because right now, in this very moment, you are being read, decoded, analyzed. The barista who served your coffee this morning made a judgment about your character based on how you held eye contact. Your colleague formed an opinion about your confidence based on where you placed your hands during the meeting. Your partner knows you're anxious before you do. They saw it in the way you touched your face, the rhythm of your breathing, the micro-expression that flashed across your features for 1/15 of a second. And yet, you walk through the world blind to this symphony of signals, this constant broadcast of your internal state that everyone else receives in high definition. You are the only one who can't hear your own frequency. You're the radio that doesn't know it's transmitting. And if the choice you have before you is this profound, would you rather continue being read without knowing it? Or would you rather learn the language that's been spoken about you your entire life? Because that's the choice that exists right now, in this moment, and you don't get to go back once you see what cannot be unseen. But here's where it gets even more unsettling. Learning to read people isn't about gaining power over others. It's about confronting the horrifying truth of how predictable, how mechanical, how unconscious most human behavior actually is, including yours. Freud didn't give us a superpower, he gave us a mirror, and most people spend their entire lives running from what it reflects. If you're feeling that discomfort right now, that slight resistance, that voice saying, "Not me, I'm different," good. That's exactly the defense mechanism we're about to dissect. And if you want to understand not just how to read others, but how to stop being an open book yourself, you need to stay with this until the very end, because the most powerful insight comes last, and it will fundamentally alter how you see every human interaction for the rest of your life. The question isn't whether you can learn to read people. The question is whether you can handle what you'll discover when you do. The question is whether you're brave enough to see the puppet strings, including the ones attached to you. And before you answer, know this. Once you see them, you can never unsee them again. And if this already has you questioning everything you thought you knew about human behavior, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Because you're about to go deeper than you've ever gone before, and this journey requires witnesses. Share this with someone who thinks they're unreadable. Let's see how confident they are by the end. So let's begin where Freud began, not with answers, but with a question that started a revolution. What if everything you think you're hiding is actually on full display? Here's what Freud understood that most people refuse to accept. You are not the author of your own behavior. You are the narrator who arrives after the fact, crafting elaborate stories to explain decisions that were already made by parts of you that never asked permission. The conscious mind, that voice in your head you call I, is nothing more than a press secretary desperately spinning explanations for actions taken by a government it doesn't control. This is the hidden problem, and it's so deeply embedded in human psychology that we've built entire civilizations around denying it. We walk around convinced that we are rational agents, making conscious choices based on clear reasoning. But Freud pulled back the curtain on this comfortable delusion and revealed something far more disturbing. The vast majority of what drives human behavior happens in the unconscious, a seething mass of repressed desires, primitive urges, unresolved childhood traumas, and ancient survival mechanisms that operate completely outside your awareness. Think about the last time you instantly disliked someone you just met. You probably created a rational explanation. They seemed arrogant, or something about them felt off. But here's what actually happened. Your unconscious detected a pattern. Maybe the way they smiled reminded you of someone who betrayed you when you were 7 years old. Maybe their posture triggered a threat response encoded in your nervous system from an encounter you don't even remember. The decision was made in milliseconds, and then your conscious mind, that dutiful press secretary, invented a story that made you feel like you were in control of your own judgment. Freud called this rationalization, and it's the primary weapon in the ego's arsenal of defense mechanisms. We cannot tolerate the reality that we don't know why we do what we do, so we create narratives. Convincing narratives, narratives we believe with absolute certainty. But belief and truth are not the same thing, and this gap between what we think motivates us and what actually motivates us is where the real reading of human nature takes place. Carl Jung, Freud's most brilliant student before their famous split, took this insight even further. Jung understood that the unconscious isn't just personal, it's collective. We carry within us the accumulated psychological patterns of our entire species, what he called archetypes. These are not abstract concepts, they are living forces that shape how we perceive reality itself. The hero, the shadow, the anima and animus. These aren't metaphors, they're the psychological infrastructure that determines which details you notice and which ones you filter out. When you meet someone new, you're not seeing them. You're seeing which archetype they activate in your unconscious, and you're projecting onto them all the qualities associated with that archetype. That's why you can instantly trust someone you've just met. They've triggered your archetype of the wise old man or the good mother. And suddenly, you're relating not to the actual person in front of you, but to an ancient pattern buried in your psyche. And here's the truly disturbing part. They're doing the exact same thing to you. This is why surface-level body language reading, the kind sold in airport business books, is mostly useless. Yes, crossed arms might indicate defensiveness, but they might also indicate that the room is cold. The real reading happens at a much deeper level. It happens when you understand that every human being is walking around with an invisible resume of psychological wounds, and they're unconsciously selecting environments, relationships, and conflicts that allow them to replay those wounds over and over again. Freud observed this in his patients and called it the repetition compulsion, the mysterious tendency of people to recreate the exact scenarios that hurt them. The woman who keeps dating emotionally unavailable men isn't unlucky. She's unconsciously seeking partners who recreate the dynamic she had with her distant father, because the unconscious mind is trying to master the trauma by reliving it. The man who sabotages every career opportunity isn't afraid of success. He's fulfilling an unconscious belief formed when he was told at age 6 that he'd never amount to anything. If this is making you uncomfortable, that's your unconscious trying to protect you from self-knowledge. The ego doesn't want you to see the machinery. And if you're starting to recognize yourself in these patterns, hit that subscribe button, because you're exactly the kind of person who needs to see where this goes. Share this with someone still convinced they're fully conscious of their own motivations. Let's introduce them to their shadow. But here's where it gets even more complex. Not only are you unconsciously driven by forces you can't see, but you're also broadcasting those forces to everyone around you through a language you don't know you're speaking. Freud called these broadcasts parapraxes, what we now call Freudian slips. But they're not just verbal mistakes, they're physical, behavioral, emotional. They're the way you lean away from someone while saying you're interested, the way your voice rises in pitch when you claim to be calm, the way your pupils dilate when you see something your conscious mind claims to find repulsive. Your body is always telling the truth. Your unconscious is always confessing. And people who understand this, people who've learned to read the language of the unconscious, can see through you like you're made of glass. Not because they're psychic, but because they've learned to notice what you're desperately trying to hide, the gap between your performance and your reality, the distance between who you claim to be and who you actually are. This is the hidden problem. You are legible, completely, utterly, terrifyingly legible. And the harder you try to hide, the more obvious the hiding becomes. The tragedy of being unread, or more accurately, of being constantly read without realizing it, is that you navigate the world like a chess player who can only see half the board. You make moves based on incomplete information, wondering why you keep losing games you thought you were winning, why that job interview felt positive but ended in rejection, why that relationship seemed perfect until it suddenly wasn't, why people seem to lose interest in you right when you think you've finally impressed them. The answer is brutally simple. They saw something you didn't know you were showing them. This creates what psychologists call a fundamental attribution error, but on a massive, life-altering scale. You attribute your failures to external circumstances, bad timing, bad luck, other people's irrationality. Meanwhile, everyone else is reading the truth written in your micro-expressions, your vocal tonality, your unconscious behavioral patterns. They're seeing your desperation when you think you're projecting confidence. They're detecting your insecurity when you believe you're demonstrating competence. They're watching you sabotage yourself in real time while you remain completely oblivious to the performance. Freud documented this phenomenon extensively in his concept of transference, the way patients would unconsciously redirect feelings from past relationships onto him as their therapist. But transference isn't limited to therapy. It's happening constantly in every interaction you have. You're transferring your father issues onto your boss, your childhood abandonment wounds onto your romantic partner, your sibling rivalries onto your colleagues, and they can feel it, even if they can't articulate it. Something about you makes them uncomfortable, or overly familiar, or inexplicably hostile, and it's because you've cast them in a role in your unconscious drama without their consent. The cognitive bias at play here is what psychologists call the illusion of transparency, but in reverse. Most people believe they're more transparent than they actually are, that their true intentions are obvious. But the real danger is the opposite illusion, believing you're opaque when you're actually translucent, believing you're successfully hiding your anxiety, your neediness, your anger, your fear, when in reality, these emotions are leaking out through 1,000 tiny channels you don't control. Your nervous system is a tattletale. When you're anxious, your heart rate increases, which changes your breathing pattern, which alters your vocal resonance, which other humans detect at an unconscious level as a signal of threat or instability. When you're lying, even lying to yourself, especially lying to yourself, your cognitive load increases, which causes micro-hesitations in your speech, slight changes in your facial symmetry, and eye movements that betray internal conflict. These aren't things you can consciously control once you understand the mechanism. They're autonomic responses, evolutionary adaptations designed to help social groups identify trustworthy versus untrustworthy members. The unconscious signals that contradict the conscious performance, entire industries would collapse. Politics, advertising, dating apps, social media. All of these systems depend on your inability to distinguish between the map and the territory, between the persona and the person. Freud understood that civilization itself is built on repression, on forcing people to suppress their authentic impulses in favor of socially acceptable performances. And the more civilized we become, the wider the gap grows between what we feel and what we're allowed to express. This creates what Jung called the shadow, all the parts of yourself you've disowned, denied, or repressed because they don't fit the image you need to project to survive in your environment. But here's the cruel paradox. The shadow doesn't disappear when you repress it. It goes underground. It becomes unconscious. And then it starts running your life from behind the scenes, expressing itself in ways you don't recognize. That's why the person who's terrified of appearing weak becomes aggressive and domineering. Why the person afraid of being seen as stupid becomes arrogantly intellectual. Why the person desperate to be loved becomes emotionally distant and unavailable. They're not choosing these behaviors. They're being controlled by the very thing they're trying to hide from. And if you're starting to recognize your own shadow in this description, you're closer to the truth than you've ever been. This is the moment to engage. Hit that like button if this is resonating. Share this with someone who needs to see their own reflection, because what comes next will show you exactly how to break free from these invisible chains. The neuroscience confirms what Freud intuited. Your brain processes information on multiple levels simultaneously, and the unconscious processing happens first, faster, and with more influence than conscious thought. Studies using fMRI technology show that your brain has already made a decision up to 7 seconds before your conscious mind becomes aware of it. 7 seconds. That's an eternity in neurological time, which means that by the time you think you're making a choice, you're actually just becoming aware of a choice that's already been made by the unconscious machinery. This is why you can't trust your own explanations for why you did what you did. You're always confabulating, always creating post hoc rationalizations for decisions made by parts of yourself you don't have access to. And people who understand this, people who've learned to read the unconscious, aren't listening to your explanations. They're watching your behavior. They're noticing the contradiction between what you say and what you do. They're reading the truth in your body while your mouth tells comfortable lies. The unseen consequence is this: you're living in a prison of your own unconscious making, and you keep wondering why the walls won't move. You're fighting battles on the wrong battlefield, trying to change your conscious thoughts and behaviors while the real war is being waged in territory you can't see. And every day you remain blind to this dynamic, you're giving away power you don't even know you have. Power to people who can see what you can't, who can manipulate the strings while you dance, convinced you're making your own moves. The trap isn't that you're being read. The trap is that you think you're not. But here's what they don't tell you in the watered-down versions of Freudian psychology. This process is not enlightening in the way you think. It's not a pleasant journey of self-discovery accompanied by soft music and journal prompts. It's archaeological work in a graveyard you've been trying to forget exists. It's digging up corpses, memories, traumas, shameful desires, rage you've buried under decades of being the bigger person. And those corpses aren't dead. They've been running your life from their graves. The first radical shift is this: stop trying to control what you show and start noticing what you're showing without trying. This is the counterintuitive leap that separates people who read psychology books from people who actually transform. Every moment you spend crafting your persona, you're strengthening the very prison you're trying to escape. Because the persona, that carefully constructed image, requires constant energy to maintain. It's like holding your breath. You can do it, but not forever, and the effort itself is a signal to everyone watching. Freud's patient records are filled with examples of people who spent years maintaining elaborate false selves, only to have those selves collapse in spectacular fashion. The respectable businessman who suddenly abandons his family. The devoted wife who has an affair that came out of nowhere. These aren't random acts. They're the shadow finally demanding its due. The repressed material doesn't stay repressed forever. It erupts. And when it does, it destroys precisely the image you were killing yourself to maintain. So the rebellion starts here. You must make the unconscious conscious, not by positive thinking or affirmations, but through ruthless self-observation. You must catch yourself in the act of performing. Notice when you're explaining yourself unnecessarily. That's your unconscious revealing guilt or insecurity. Notice when you're name-dropping or credential flexing. That's your unconscious screaming about inadequacy. Notice when you're telling a story where you're the hero or the victim. That's your ego desperately trying to maintain a narrative that protects you from a truth you're not ready to face. Jung understood this and developed what he called active imagination, a technique where you dialogue with the parts of yourself you've disowned. You sit with your anger instead of suppressing it. You examine your jealousy instead of rationalizing it away. You befriend your shadow instead of projecting it onto others. This isn't therapeutic in the gentle, comforting sense. It's confrontational. It's sitting across from yourself and asking the questions you've been avoiding. Why do I need people to think I'm successful? What am I actually afraid will happen if they see me fail? Whose approval am I still seeking? And why does a person who may be decades dead or absent still control my behavior? And if this level of self-interrogation feels impossible, that's because your ego is fighting back. The defense mechanisms are activating right now: rationalization, intellectualization, denial. But if you're serious about breaking free, you need to see this through to the end. Hit subscribe, because the deeper we go, the more valuable this becomes. Share this with someone trapped in their own performance. They need to know there's a way out. Here's the historical precedent that proves this works. Every revolutionary who truly changed human consciousness did this work. Nietzsche, who declared God is dead and forced humanity to confront the death of absolute meaning, spent years in solitary self-examination, documenting the war between his conscious beliefs and his unconscious drives. Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz and founded logotherapy, learned to read the unconscious motivations of both his captors and fellow prisoners, and used that knowledge to find meaning in meaninglessness. These weren't people who read a book and felt inspired. They were people who descended into their own psychological underworld and came back with maps. The practical technique Freud developed, and this is what actually works, is called free association. You speak or write without censoring, without trying to make sense, without performing for an imagined audience. You let the unconscious speak its own language, and you don't interrupt it with conscious correction. The moment you catch yourself thinking, "I shouldn't say that," or "that doesn't make sense," or "that makes me look bad," that's the moment you're closest to the truth. Here is the truth that will change everything. You cannot read people deeply without becoming unreadable yourself. And you cannot become unreadable by hiding better. You become unreadable by having nothing left to hide. This is the final paradox, the ultimate insight that Freud circled around but never quite named directly. The only way to be truly opaque is to be completely transparent. Let that sink in. The person who terrifies others with their ability to see through facades isn't the one wearing the best mask. It's the one who's dropped all masks entirely. They're not playing a game you can decode because they're not playing a game at all. They've integrated their shadow so completely that there's no longer a gap between their public performance and their private reality. What you see is what exists, not because they're simple, but because they're whole. This is what Freud was actually teaching, beneath all the theories and terminology. Human suffering comes from fragmentation. We split ourselves into acceptable and unacceptable parts, and then we spend our entire lives trying to hide the unacceptable parts while pretending the acceptable parts represent the totality of who we are. But the unacceptable parts don't disappear. They just operate in the dark, sabotaging us in ways we can't predict or control. The solution isn't better hiding. The solution is integration. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming a unified self rather than a collection of competing personas. And here's what makes it so powerful. When you're no longer splitting your energy between who you are and who you're pretending to be, you become psychologically efficient in a way that's almost supernatural. You're not wasting cognitive resources on maintaining inconsistent narratives. You're not leaking energy through the cracks in your performance. You become a unified field of consciousness, and people can feel that wholeness even if they can't articulate what they're sensing. This is why the most powerful people in any room are often the quietest. They're not performing power, they simply are integrated, and integration reads as power because it's so rare. Everyone else is frantically juggling their personas, monitoring how they're being perceived, adjusting their behavior to match what they think others want to see. The integrated person is just present. And that presence is magnetic precisely because it's authentic in a world drowning in performance. But here's the practical reality of how you actually do this work. You must practice what Freud called the talking cure on yourself. You must create space, daily disciplined space, where you allow your unconscious to speak without judgment. Not meditation necessarily, not journaling about gratitude, but real, uncomfortable confrontation with the parts of yourself you've been running from. Start here, today. Each morning, spend 10 minutes asking yourself one question. What am I pretending not to know? Don't answer quickly. Sit with the discomfort. Usually, within 3 minutes, something true will surface. Maybe you're pretending not to know that your relationship is over. Maybe you're pretending not to know that you're in the wrong career. Maybe you're pretending not to know that your niceness is manipulation, that your ambition is fear, that your independence is terror of depending on anyone. Write down what surfaces. Don't fix it. Don't judge it. Don't spin it into a positive reframe. Just acknowledge it. Second practice, notice your rationalizations in real time. The moment you catch yourself explaining your behavior to yourself, stop. Ask, what am I defending against? If you're explaining why you deserve that purchase, why you snapped at that person, why you didn't follow through on that commitment, you're rationalizing, which means your unconscious is revealing something your ego doesn't want to face. The rationalization itself is the breadcrumb trail leading back to the truth. Third practice, pay attention to what you judge in others. Freud and Jung both understood that we don't judge people for having traits. We judge them for having traits we've repressed in ourselves. If someone's arrogance enrages you, examine your own disowned arrogance. If someone's neediness disgusts you, look at how you've had to deny your own needs. If someone's success triggers bitter resentment, investigate what ambition you've had to bury to stay safe or likable or humble. Your judgments are a mirror. Use them. Fourth practice, and this is crucial for reading others, start noticing patterns instead of incidents. One behavior is just data. 3 behaviors repeated across different contexts is a pattern. 5 behaviors that contradict someone's stated values is a character structure. When someone shows you who they are repeatedly, not through what they say, but through what they consistently do, believe the pattern. Your conscious mind wants to believe the explanation, the apology, the promise to change. Your unconscious already knows the pattern will repeat. Learn to trust what you're seeing over what you're being told. Fifth practice, develop what Freud called evenly suspended attention. When you're with someone, don't focus on their words. Let your awareness soften and notice everything peripherally. Their breathing pattern, where their eyes go when they're thinking. What topics make their voice change pitch? What questions they avoid? What stories they repeat? You're not interrogating them. You're just noticing without attachment to what you notice meaning anything specific. Over time, patterns emerge. Contradictions become visible. The person's unconscious starts speaking directly to yours, bypassing the conscious performances entirely. The paradigm shift, the realization that makes everything suddenly clear, is this. Everyone is always telling you exactly who they are, not through their words, but through their patterns, through what they do when they're not trying to impress you, through how they treat people who can't offer them anything, through what they laugh at, what they avoid, what they're curious about, what threatens them. The unconscious cannot lie because it doesn't know how to perform. It simply is. And here's the final, most liberating truth. Once you understand this, manipulation becomes nearly impossible to pull off against you. Because manipulation depends on you believing the performance and ignoring the pattern. It depends on you prioritizing stated intentions over revealed character. It depends on you wanting so badly to believe in the version of reality someone's selling that you override your own unconscious perception. But when you trust what you're actually seeing, when you honor the pattern over the promise, you become essentially unmanipulatable. If you've made it this far, you're part of a rare group. Most people click away when the mirror gets too close, but you stayed. That matters. Hit that like button, not for me, but as a commitment to yourself that you're going to do this work. Subscribe so you remember to keep going when the resistance kicks in. And share this with one person who needs to hear it. Just one. The person who's trapped in their own performance and doesn't know it yet. You are not condemned to be a mystery to yourself while remaining an open book to everyone else. You can become fluent in the language of the unconscious. You can learn to read the subtext of every interaction. You can integrate your shadow so completely that you stop leaking the very things you're trying to hide. but it requires something most people won't give. The courage to see yourself without the comforting distortions, without the protective narratives, without the ego's desperate defense mechanisms. Freud didn't give us a theory, he gave us a practice. A way of seeing that, once learned, cannot be unlearned. You'll start seeing the patterns everywhere, in yourself, in others, in the structures of society itself. And yes, it's unsettling. Yes, it makes casual relationships more difficult because you can't pretend not to see what you're seeing. Yes, it means you'll lose faith in a lot of performances you used to find comforting. But you'll gain something far more valuable. You'll gain yourself, the real self. Not the persona you constructed to survive your childhood, not the image you maintained to feel acceptable, but the integrated totality of who you actually are when no one's watching. And that self, that whole, undivided, unashamed self, is the most powerful thing you'll ever possess. The people who truly changed the world weren't the ones with the best performances. They were the ones who became so completely themselves that they made everyone else's performance look exhausting by comparison. That's what reading people ultimately teaches you. Authenticity isn't a moral virtue, it's a superpower. You came here to learn how to read people. You're leaving with something far more dangerous, the ability to read yourself. Use it wisely, or don't use it at all. But you can't pretend you don't know anymore. That luxury just ended. The book is open. You're both the reader and the text. What you do with that knowledge determines everything that comes next. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more of such deep, thought-provoking content.